help me give big smooches to my guest, Esther Lee, the deputy editor of The Knot.
Thank you. It's so lovely to be here, and big smooches back to you.
Oh my gosh, thank you. I appreciate the smooches. And I have big smooches just for The Knot in general. Okay, I'm going to take you a little bit down memory lane. I'm kind of going to date myself a little bit. I actually used The Knot to plan my wedding 17 years ago, Esther. And it was like back when you could no one was doing wedding websites. So it was like I had all of these tools at my disposal because of The Knot. I was like on the cutting edge of technology, and still to this day, my wedding was like the best day of my life. So I have you and the team at The Knot to thank in part for my memorable nuptials.
Oh my goodness. I didn't mean to look so surprised. It's just that you can drop your skincare routine with me later because you look
Okay.
so, I couldn't believe 17 years of marriage.
Child bride there.
Oh my God. So, so much has changed since then. So it's interesting. I'm curious to think what you think about the wedding planning process now since it's much more tech driven.
Mhm.
But much has evolved with weddings. We've made it much easier since then too, which is hard to believe.
Yeah, you've made it a lot easier, and you also have really broadened the lens. So it's not just the focus on the wedding. Like I think a lot of people hear The Knot, oh, I'm not there yet. That's not for me. But you really have a whole wellness vertical that you oversee, and you consider like the wedding doesn't just start at the wedding, right? You got to back it up.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the most inherent parts of this entire process is actually that relationships are a core function. You don't get married without having a solid relationship, an engagement, and every part of that process. And it doesn't matter. Ultimately, like you are marrying each other, and the wedding will happen, but we want to be there for couples as well throughout that process and after it too.
So true. So is that why The Knot took the liberty of doing a 2024 relationship and intimacy study?
That was a nice tee up to this guest. The not 2024 relationship and intimacy study was actually our first of its kind survey. We haven't done anything like this before. In the past, we did some ad hoc surveys around like financial wellness and relationships, and a little bit more of that. But this really is a deep dive between both dating sets of couples and those who are single, as well as couples who are married. In total, we actually did 1,000 on each side of surveys and landed at a 2,000 person launch and holistic view of both subsets.
Yeah, it was very comprehensive. And I loved how you looked at all aspects of relationship, both people who are dating and people who are married. You looked at intimacy, you looked at attitudes towards relationships and dating and what people even like to do on dates. And of course, even once you are partnered, you have to keep dating your partner. So don't forget
It's
that, everybody.
so
so,
true. So true.
so what was the most surprising thing, Esther, that came out for you as the deputy editor of The Knot? What
Um,
shocked you here?
Yes. So there were actually some key data points, starting with the standards that people look for. Oftentimes, there is this focus and priority on like the physical attraction, and sure, that's important. However, like there are some other qualities in partners that singles are looking for, and I do believe that's actually one of the most interesting facets of the study. In addition, we're actually looking at a different framework of how people are meeting potential partners. Oftentimes there's this narrative of like, oh, it's all dating apps. It's all I have to be on in order to meet someone. But that's not true. And we found that out in this study too.
Ooh, well, spill the beans, Esther. I mean, of course, we're going to send everybody to look at the study afterwards, but I'm a big fan of dating apps. That is how I met my partner and how the majority of my clients and listeners have met. But where else should they be?
Yeah, that's fascinating too, right? Most engaged couples, we do find that many, in fact, with our last Jordan engagement study, we found that 28% met through dating apps, and that number just keeps rising. So that is like a great assessment of just this landscape in general. For those who are dating, however, and there has been some mention around like the dating app fatigue of it all, but what they're finding is that most of those who were surveyed through the study didn't meet their partners online. Actually, they 62% met through mutual friends or a friend of a friend or in common. So it just shows that those real life connection points, we saw it in Nobody Wants This recently,
Mhm.
are valued.
Mm. So this is all a survey of old folks then, right?
It could be let's say it's a mix of Gen Z and millennials. It's just interesting to see that dichotomy too between those two generations, because like you see one referring to the other as chuggy, and then you see like millennials thinking of like Gen Z just coming and doing all of these different things that are wearing sneakers at the club is one of my favorite references. Changing our lingo, yeah.
Yeah, that's really a thing, wearing sneakers at the club and everywhere.
But I thank them. I actually thank them for that. I'm loving my Vehas, and I just walk everywhere with those now, with a skirt, with everything.
Yeah, well, I love that we also are letting ourselves just be ourselves. I feel like in prior generations and prior times in history, you had to do so much to be, to be in a space of attraction. And I really appreciate that people are looking for different things, and there's different signifiers of attraction now than just like how do you look? Is and in spite of everybody saying it's all about looks and the swipe swipe swipe. So what else do you see from this study? What have you seen that people are really looking for in a partner?
Yeah. We're going back to sort of like the core part of the study, which is also around dating apps and how couples meet. We find, and I've said this a lot, but anecdotally, it was always around like this idea of values and lifestyle. Like, where are you the most in life? And can you meet a partner in real life through those people? Same with mutual friends. What do your best friends value? Who do they connect with? What kind of community are they building? And how are potential partners or singles showing up and then meeting each other magically through that? So through this study, actually there are some points that did go into this when it comes to the standards that they're looking for in a partner. The biggest one I wanted to mention is really this idea of finding someone who's easy to talk to. Actually, being easy to talk to was actually the top quality, with 76% of all respondents saying that was it.
Wow. I okay. I don't know if you can answer this, Esther, but I'm just really curious your point of view on that idea of being easy to talk to. I'm sure people are listening being like, "Okay, how can I be easier to talk to?" You've seen a lot of couple stories and, working on a lot of content around wellness and around relationships. Is there advice that you could give on how to foster that connection and that communication?
Yeah, it's so funny, and this is personal, but I'm working on this myself. And I found that there were moments and instances like I would walk into a room and then just immediately talk to like one of my friends in the corner and just like, and then close myself off from the rest of the room. There has to be this openness and this lightness, almost like you were, again, to your point of showing up as yourself and being comfortable with who you are. Wearing sneakers to the club and not really caring about the fact that you might get a few stares here and there, but their opinion doesn't matter. It's a reflection of your own personal taste. That comfort and that ease, I am learning with significance that it does open its way up to conversation, and then also being open to people who approach you and engage with you. Like there were moments in, I think when I look back into my 20s where I was like, ew, like, I don't want to talk to anybody. Like I just want, and there are people who sometimes who feel a little bit shyer, like myself too, who might be closed off to that interaction. But ultimately, like it's that openness and that easiness and that breath of fresh air, of being willing to connect, that I think makes goes a long way.
Absolutely. And I would also add listening is an element of it too, because I so many times I hear from listeners, well, I had this date and it just felt like the person was talking at me. And we think that we need to speak more to be heard, to be connected with. Like, oh, well, I'll just keep throwing out all these lines to get to hook them. But really that connection that we're looking for, so much more of it is about how you make the other person feel, right? And how you're interacting with the information that the other person has said.
That is so true. We hear a lot about mansplaining and just how unacceptable it is in 2024 at this point. but truly I think it's not the mansplaining or like the information, it's just how it's construed or how it's conveyed, and whether or not like you're actually engaging actively in the conversation. Are you listening to me? Like, are we actually having a conversation that's two-way, or is it really, I don't know. Ultimately, that's such a good point too. It's listening, the 80/20 principle.
Esther, I wrote a book called F the Fairy Tale this year, and I identified what I see as the 4 biggest myths in attraction and compatibility in dating. And one of those myths, Esther, is the chemistry myth. I think we're putting a little too much focus on this nebulous feeling of chemistry, particularly in the first meet, even in the first swipe, even in the first date and throughout. Now, you have the goods because you asked the questions when you did this survey. So, what did you find in the 2024 relationship and intimacy study about a sexual attraction or chemistry? Is it really that important to daters today?
It is. And I don't want to say that your book, I do want to circle back to your book because I'm so curious and I need to read into it more, because I come from the Disney princess generation who
Of
truly
course, we all do.
believe, yeah, that magical fairy tale of just meeting someone. Sexual attraction and chemistry are still very much valued. 72% of respondents. So this obviously, it's like top quality is easy to talk to, but then sexual chemistry is actually second. And they were able to select multiple options through this study because it doesn't add up otherwise. But we did find that a lot of couples felt that this was incredibly important as they were dating.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't have I didn't do the same study that you did, but I agree that people prioritize it. My point with the myth is that I think people prioritize it too much. But it was interesting because in your study you looked at both married couples and single folks. And what I found interesting, because there's this myth, this theory that chemistry is going to wane, and like I feel like I hear a million times people are like, "Oh, well, the looks are going to fade and I have to still there and then what will remain of our relationship?"
Oh
And
my
it's
God.
like, I mean, like I said, I've been married 17 years. I'm still pretty attracted to my husband. As you were looking at this study with married couples, it seems that you found that actually is more common, that more people aren't just being married because they like each other and because they share the same values, but also because they still have that sexual chemistry and attraction, right?
Correct. I want to separate two things here based off of what we're saying. I think some people are pursuing that feeling as they're dating of like butterflies in their stomach. I'm so excited to be wrapped up in this new sort of world and some sort of like chemistry that's happening between a new partner or a new potential partner in many cases lately with the dating scape. Whereas I actually spoke to several therapists for to support this study. I was like, hey, is this true on your part, or what can couples do more of in order to get there? The first part is yes, we found that married couples do have more sex within the first 3 years of their marriage, especially than actually pre-engaged couples or singles. In addition, there is this notion of, again, to circle back to comfort and being yourself. There's an emphasis on almost like it's hard to have chemistry or to sustain chemistry when you aren't comfortable with who you are with that opposite party. What do you
Mhm.
think?
Yeah, that is totally true. I did find it interesting reading the stat that that married couples had more sex than couples who were newly dating. Not surprised than people who were single, because you have to get to that point of trust to be able to be intimate with someone. But I was like, "Oh, wow, what is it then about marriage that makes people," and I don't know that you have the answer, Esther, but I was like, "There's gotta be something in this commitment, in,
Yes,
the ability to your point, like, be free and comfortable with this person because you've fully committed to each other in front of all of your family and friends, that somehow boosts the attraction or the sexual energy. I don't
Yeah,
know.
like this person is my person. I can see that. There's actually someone on our team, on the not editorial team, who recently got married, I think like 2 weeks ago. And
Oh.
I asked her the question. I was like, hey, do you like, we were asking her, do you feel any different? Because we spoke to you a week ago and you were engaged then and now you're married. And she enthusiastically on this call, I have to recall, like, she was like, yes, like 1,000% yes. She's like, we're committed now. Like, this is like, they've gone past that threshold of engagement to wedding and marriage to now she's taking on his last name. And it doesn't have to be just that or that exact order of things. Some people are very modern and prefer other ways of going about their marriage once they pass it. But ultimately, it's like your hands are tied. You tied the knot, like you did this. And so I think she's a great representation of that sentiment actually of commitment and how that plays out in how couples interact after they go through the wedding process too.
Mm. That's a really great story, and I love what you did there too, with tying the knot back in.
Oh, yeah,
Very genius,
it's
very
like it
genius.
was actually unintentional though, really. It's subliminal at this point. Yeah.
Yeah, and I do think, that attraction is important. I just tell my clients also to give it time to develop because also, like, if your goal is marriage or a long-term relationship, you got a long time. You you have a long runway to fill, and so you why I say, like, why rush into it? Because if it can only get better, if you're with the right person, then there's no rush. Um, there was also something that I hear a lot when I'm taking in clients and asking them what they want that, came up as an area of attraction, and that is sense of humor. And
Yes.
here's the thing, Esther, I think is so interesting because we always say we want someone with a sense of humor, but that humor is different for each person and how we define that. And since you brought up a Netflix show, I'll bring up on Love is Blind. I feel like on this season, there's a lot of jokey guys, and the women are like, "Stop that. Like, stop messing around." I'm like, all I hear is that women want a guy with a sense of humor, but it's like very specific to that person what kind of humor is they mean, you know?
Yeah, it's subjective, isn't it? Like when
Yeah.
you think about it, ultimately, humor is actually so important too. It's one of the top three qualities that people are looking for as they're looking for a potential partner. 69% of couples said that this is what they were also looking for in a partner. I think like that's why we see oftentimes certain bios on dating apps might infuse that additional humor level. Also, this person might not have seemed like your type necessarily, but you're like, you know what? Let me give this person a swipe. This would be a fun date. And oftentimes, like there are like quite often actually I hear from my friends too that sense of humor. He has to make me laugh. I have to be able to laugh through life. Like he makes me laugh, or whatever else that looks like. um, it's important because we have a long time together, like with our potential partners down the line. And so don't you want to laugh through that rather than feel
Yeah.
nervous?
Look, and sometimes you go through some highs and some lows, and sometimes all you can do is laugh. So, yeah, you have
Yeah.
to be able to laugh through that.
Yeah.
And to share a sense of humor too, because, I've also seen a lot of relationships go sideways because the other person thought that something was funny and really they crossed a boundary for the other person. So humor actually can be a good tool for identifying that. So I guess the best way really to figure out if the person that you're dating is the right fit is really just by dating them. Everybody wants me to tell them like, "Well, how do you know? How did you know when you met your husband? How do you know if it's the one? What are the signs?" And each relationship, as you've seen, develops differently. But I do find actually we have more control over how things develop than we give ourselves credit for. And some of that comes from the actual dates that you're doing. It's interesting that you brought up the dating app having infusing humor as a way to build connections. I think I hadn't really thought about that, Esther, and it's really smart. Are there ways that from this study, are there certain dates that we can do that like more people would respond to, that more people would feel that connection from?
Do you want me to start with one of the most interesting takeaways from this study around dating, like
Oh,
dating types
please.
or interaction? Okay.
Oh, please.
Um, I found that people go on video game dates. It's something that I haven't tried before ever. Like I've never gone on a video game date. And I'm like, wow, I could see the bonding happening. And there is a difference between like the number like the percentage of Gen Zers who are doing it and the percentage of millennials, but it's much higher than expected.
Okay, break this down for the people who've been married 17 plus years or who are of that generation. When you say video game dates, do you mean like I'm thinking 3 things, Esther. Either you're meeting in a virtual space and you have your headset on and your gaming chair and you are meeting and dating online virtually but playing together. You could go to like a Dave& and Buster's, you could be playing video games there. Or you could be together in the same room and you're both playing Xbox or something together in the same room. What kind of video game dates are we talking about?
I think it's like those couples video games. Like actually if we're going to be explicit about it, like it's like the couples who are sitting down and doing like both of them taking on a headset or whatever else that looks like, and playing a game together. And there's plenty of, I didn't realize this, but there is a Gen Z on my team. And she tapped her boyfriend and she was like, hey, what do you think are the best video games for couples? And he was like, we play like this and this, but like, let's, I have a whole list. There's like 20 plus options that she pulled together. And I was like, I learned so much just by editing this piece. Um, I have a fun real life
Wow.
story actually about this. I didn't realize was this common, but one of my neighbors met her now boyfriend through they were playing video games virtually, and she really fell for him as they were playing, and now they live together and they're so adorable. She's like dogs and they he comes outside a lot, and I'm like, I cannot believe this is a real life story of a couple who met virtually playing video games, but it's such a good story.
It's a great story. I actually heard that Sarah Silverman met her boyfriend that way as well. And I think actually, so when we consider the whole landscape of people meeting online, because people are like, okay, what I think what the stat you had was like 25%, 28% have met online.
Hmm.
Usually when we hear that number, it's only talking about dating apps. But when we consider online gaming, when we consider social media, when we consider, any kind of online forum, that number I think we will see is a lot bigger than we estimated before and is going to continue to grow as we are living our lives in both online spaces and, in-person IRL spaces. It has to.
Have you heard of like LinkedIn solicitations around this? Have you
Sure.
heard of this?
Oh,
Yeah, I think
yes.
or like we know about
What's
sliding
your
into the
take?
DMs for Instagram or for everything else, but like I think it's so funny to take a corporate profile and to slide into someone's messages that way. Like usually it's like, you know, people searching for jobs or recruiters or former colleagues or something. Imagine getting requested for a date through that medium. It's another option.
It is another option. I have been known to say on this show before, I don't think it's your best option,
Hmm.
but look, I mean, people also meet at work. People also meet at networking events. So, it's I kind of beginning where you started the conversation, like staying open. You could meet someone, anywhere. So, um I like the possibility of it. I just kinda get the ick from
Me
just
too.
the idea of somebody, like, sliding into a LinkedIn DM in a yeah, in a inappropriate way for that venue.
For sure. Imagine just having your headshot, like your corporate headshot of you in like a suit and just like sliding into someone's DM. I certainly feel you on that as well. Do you want to hear about the other ways that people are dating? What this is, there is a theme to all of this. I'm realizing
Ooh, yeah,
the
tell
most
me.
popular though is no surprise. It's dinner and drinks. Like 85% of all couples for sure had dinner and drinks over the past 3 months. Like that is fact. Um, but more than that, it's we from there when it comes to those smaller numbers, like people doing a physical activity together. It could be a hike. I love a walking date. It's like one of my favorite ways to get to know someone. During COVID, I would walk over the Brooklyn Bridge with guys.
Oh,
I
wow.
lived,
How
yeah.
long is that?
So
That's a few that's like a 5-mile commitment round trip,
not
right?
only not only are you testing, that's actually fair, but like do the little loop around Dumbo too. Just testing their stamina along the way. Can this person keep up with me as we're walking? But like,
No joke. I actually have clients that prioritize fitness, and I have specifically said to them, "Do a walking date," because they've knocked some people out. Because they're like, "If you said that you were in shape, and you huffing and puffing after 2 miles. Take a
that's
lap,
so,
buddy."
I know, like, can you imagine being drenched in sweat? I mean, like some people would find that really hot, but on the other hand, it's a great way to if that's but again, it's what they value. Like that person
Yeah.
values that. Same with like when we look at like there are couples who go on. I think this is really cute road trip dates. Like 26%, like almost a fourth of all, or more than a fourth of all couples went on a road trip date and just like talked in the car, took in whatever scenic drive they were doing. And it just shows like maybe there's something there too that they really appreciate about each other intentionally. Same with like creative projects. 19% of couples do, one out of every five couples doing that nearly over the last 3 months. Just kind of again showcases like lifestyle overlap and the respect for one another's hobbies potentially or something else of that nature.
There's another theme I'm picking up here, Esther,
Okay.
and it is cheap.
That's
I was
fair.
like, "Oh, okay. People don't wanna spend money." I mean, other than the dinner and drinks, it's like
Yeah.
going for a walk, doing creative projects, and I think you even said in the report, like, at home, things at home. Even the road trip. I'm like, "I got so bougie, I just fly everywhere." But I was like, as you were talking, I was reminiscing about a road trip that my husband and I took when we were dating. It was like a 6-hour road trip, and we listened to audiobooks, and then we, like, talked about the audiobooks.
I
And
mean,
I'm
like,
like, "Oh, we don't do that anymore." But that sounds sort of romantic, but
yeah,
also inexpensive.
and I mean, it's a perk, right? Like, I think one of the biggest themes is like and this is just a theory of mine. Again, like, back me up if you don't think it's correct, like at all, or feel free to dare to differ. Um, it's the fact that like we went through COVID, we got accustomed to doing activities outdoors, or also like kind of enhancing our personal hobbies and getting to know ourselves and like what we're looking for or things that we find fun. So yes, there are couples who look for the affordability of it all, of course, like naturally. But I think another theme from all of this is like a remnant of what we all lived through potentially.
Mm. Man, you are wise, Esther. That is
Oh,
so astute. And, like, to get all of that from the study and just asking people, "What kind of dates do you like doing?" Very, very smart, and I I look forward to reading more of your work and more on the knot. Before we go, though, there was one other element of the study that I think our listeners would be really interested in.
yeah.
You also looked at deal breakers, relationship deal breakers, and there were a couple points that I found pretty interesting there. So, no
Mhm.
surprise, lack of trust was high on the list, poor communication, infidelity. I want to talk about the other two. Lack of chemistry. You said 1 in 3, nearly 1 in 3 of unmarried respondents felt that a lack of sexual compatibility or chemistry was a deal breaker in a past relationship. So that means like they moved into the relationship, right? And then they got to the point where they were like, not you anymore. Right? Is that what I'm taking from the study?
Yeah, I think there's something deeper also. Like, I'm on a roll with the wisdom, or just like the insights.
Let's go. I love it.
Clearly, like I've dated a lot. My friends have dated a lot. Like we all have different theories around this, but there's like that enchantment period, right? Where like it feels like for many couples, and this is where I love your advice about slowing down and maybe reflecting more on that portion of dating. Might be a little bit more helpful when people rush into things. Oftentimes like even the chemistry of our brains like get wired to like think about that person a different way, and that enchantment period oftentimes could be shattered. It's not always the case, but there are possibilities where they are shattered when someone is romanticized solely because of the physicality or because of that chemistry. um,
Mm.
what do you think about that?
I again, ding, 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 very wise. Like,
So
I think it's that word, the solely. It's like if you are if it's led with the chemistry and that chemistry falls out for some reason, what are you left with? And
exactly.
that I think that's another vote for why it's important to focus on the chemistry, but focus on these values and goals and communication and all of the other things that we've been talking about. Okay, one last one,
Okay.
because this is actually we haven't talked about this in a while on the show. Long distance relationships. In this study, you found that 27% of pre-married respondents considered long distance to be a deal breaker in a relationship. Tell me more about that.
What is long distance though? That's also subjective. Like some people are like, "Oh, I live in Manhattan, but he lives in Long Island City. I can't do this. That's long distance." Like,
A lot of people say
yeah, I know. New
that.
Yorkers, am I
I
right?
live in LA and I was in Hollywood, and my husband, when we were dating, he lived in Santa Monica, and I would say it was a long distance relationship because literally it could take an hour sometimes in
Yeah,
traffic.
and that's
Now it's
fair.
like an hour and a half. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, that's fair. I know. Have we seen that lately?
Traffic's
The
gotten
freeway
worse.
lately is worse. Yeah.
Ridiculous.
Um, it's like, what are you valuing when it comes to even long distance? Like, there are couples who need that physical proximity. Like, they need that closeness with their partner and they like relish that. Like, they need it. However, there are also people who then also value, like, how do the actual long distance couples who end up marrying end up getting to that point? And it might be because they value the communication aspect. Like,
Mm.
they will pick up the
You'd have to have
phones.
that.
Right.
You'd have to have the communication really nailed down if because it has to be deliberate, right? It has to it's something that you have to work for. You can't just like wake up in the morning and like, "Oh, I got to tell you this one thing." Right?
Right. It's the
You're not just there.
intentionality. True.
Yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
it is ultimately. It's expressing that intentionality, showcasing that commitment along the way, which not everyone is accustomed to in relationships, but it exists. And that's how many couples end up going through hurdles and go through extraordinary barriers to end up with each other too. And it's not a Disney movie actually. We do have a couple actually. We had our not destination trip like recently with a group of engaged influencers. It's so much fun. I learned so much along the way.
That's
And
cute.
one couple in particular, it struck me. I was talking with them at lunch, and Gabby, she like lives in Florida, and then her fiance Luke has a gorgeous British accent, and he was living in London. And like, talk about, I think they met actually gaming too. Wow, this seems to be a recurring theme now that we're having this conversation. Um, but very intentionally, they started to seek each other out and communicate. And I heard their story, and I was like, oh, there. It just showcases that, like, if he wanted to, not only he, but if she wanted to, she could too. So both
Mhm.
parties chose to do this, even though it likely was hard. And they only saw each other, I think, like sporadically. He would fly across the pond to come see her. Like she would go to London. They would travel the world together. But they had to commit to make those plans. And yeah, that's all it is ultimately. It's a great theme that you picked up.
Hey, thanks. Yeah, and I've had so many clients that have found love long distance that like we tend to look for people like we're swiping the same apps the same way, looking in our same communities, doing our same things, talking to our same friends, and going, why aren't we meeting anyone? And sometimes if we just open the aperture a little bit, it's like maybe an hour away, maybe they're in another borough, maybe they're across the world. But if you can really focus on these things that you talked about that really are the predictors of compatibility, the that communication, that connection, those shared values, if you can focus on those things, then the things like geography don't matter, especially post pandemic when a lot of people can work remotely or you can just redesign your life. I think that was one of the big takeaways from the pandemic is like, oh, these things that I thought were fixed in my life are not. Like I can change these things and certain factors outside of my control could change at the drop of a hat. and we got to live our life, and one of the most important aspects of our lives are relationships, the relationships and who we choose to spend our time with. So I think that's a good place to bring this to a close. But before we go, I always like to ask my guests what their most unpopular opinion about dating or relationships is right now.
You know what? For a first date, you should put in effort. Like, no matter what that looks like, either way. I know people are like, show up as yourself. Yes, show up as yourself. But I think showcasing that extra effort also displays respect towards whomever is planning that date. If it's a walking date, show up in your sneakers, not stilettos. If it's, if it's a really nice dinner and drinks, I put in that effort, to maybe look a little bit more. I don't want everyone. Demure is so overused lately. I just can't anymore. But you know what I mean? Like
Look
on
the
both,
part. Look
look
the
the
part.
part, dress the part. Yeah. There is something
Dress
in.
for what do they say? Dress for the job you want, not the job you
Yeah,
have.
yeah, no, it's exactly what I was thinking about. Like there is something about, again, that intentionality and just showing up, even though you're being yourself. Like, at least taking the extra effort and care to show that person that you respect their time too. I think that's an unpopular opinion. Not everyone will agree with me, and I hope I don't get eviscerated for that either.
No, I don't think you will be eviscerated. And I think, again, very wise advice. So I think we should try to make that popular by showing up as our best selves every single time, first date, second date, into the future. Thank you so much for being here, Esther, and for sharing your wisdom and also this 2024 relationship and intimacy study by The Knot. We will put the link in the show notes. Thank you.
Thank you. This was so much fun.